How's it going, everybody? I'm Jeff Slakey with the Shelton School District, and we're going to start a series for you to kind of help navigate through some of the different emotions that people feel kind of on a daily, weekly basis. I'm happy today to be at Faith Lutheran Church here on North 13th in Shelton with Pastor Terry Oliver. How you doing?
Doing pretty good, Jeff. How about yourself?
I'm well. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
And we're going to talk a little bit about grief today.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a bunch of questions that I have kind of worked on for myself, talking to others in preparation for this. And we're just kind of hopefully get a chance to help people understand that this is an emotion and a feeling that everybody goes through.
That's right.
And while it could be difficult at times to talk about, there are resources available, and there are people out there to help.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So let's kind of start with a basic an overview of grief and what grief is and how it feels, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Grief is primarily, it's a very natural, normal emotion. And it's prompted by a feeling of loss, that something meaningful or someone important, someone especially that we have loved, is gone, is missing, is not in our life. Life has changed in some radical way, especially in a major, serious grief. And there's a lot of griefs that are normal, everyday kinds of things. I went to school, we'll say, and I forgot my cell phone, or something that I thought I needed. And so I feel bad momentarily because it's missing, but I get on with it.
Sure.
But there's other kinds of grief that become overwhelming. They become things that take and shake us to the core. And things, major things like a divorce or a death in the family, a trauma, abuse, abandonment, homelessness, those things shake the whole fabric of life for people. And it's how to deal with those things that we especially want to help.
How is grief different from mourning?
Thank you. A very good question. Grief is the inward pain that one feels from having a loss. Mourning is the outward expression. And that outward expression of mourning is the key to being able to eventually integrate that grief into our life, reconcile that loss with our new sense of who we are and what our purpose in life is, and be able to go on to love again, to live a happy life, to all of those things we want to have out of life. Those who mourn well will again live well. And if we live well, we will be able to love well.
When it comes back to grief, I hear people talk about the stages of grief. Can you go over those and maybe briefly how each one works you through the process?
Yes, I would be happy to. I first want to say I wish it did, but grief doesn't follow a normal, predictable pattern of stages.
Okay.
I know we're indebted to Kubler-Ross for her work. That was primarily aimed at people who are in the process of a terminal illness and on their way to death.
Interesting.
And so it's not the same for everyone, especially in loss. And for one thing, grief is crazy, and it can take us in all different directions, and these emotions can come pouring at us in different proportions at different times. But there are a lot of feelings that go with grief. So initially, of course, when I get the news that say that my oldest son had committed suicide, I was in shock. I was numb. I felt like the whole universe had stopped moving for me. And that numbness and shock, later I had to get something done. I had to get back on the scene. But I was disorganized. I was afraid. I was lost. I was confused. How on earth could this have happened? And along with that, then, I was angry. I was depressed. I was very sad. And I, over time, continued to go through emotions that reflected that loss in my life.
Do people and will people go through each of those stages, or is it kind of unique to what's happening right there with them?
Well, first of all, everyone's grief is unique.
Okay.
There's unique circumstances. There's a unique person that you've lost, if we're talking about the loss of death. And you are a unique person the way you experience life. So there's no carbon copy. Everyone I talk to or listen to in a grief conversation teaches me something, because they are the one that knows, they're the expert on their own experience. But there are some commonalities, I would say, to what we need to do, some bases we need to touch in our mourning in order to be able to process this grief, and what I would call the needs of mourning.
When it comes to outward expression of emotions, one thing that came up a couple times talking with folks was crying, and crying in front of our children or our families or our coworkers even as we go through this process. Talk to me a little bit about that and how that too is kind of a natural part of this.
It really is, Jeff. And tears are a gift to cleanse and to wash our soul. If we bottle up our tears, we do ourselves no favors. And we don't do a favor to others around us. Problem is, we grow up in our North American culture, which first of all wants to avoid pain at all costs. And secondly, we are mourning adverse. We do not want to mourn publicly because somehow we're going to feel embarrassed or shamed, and people around us don't know what to do. We make them uncomfortable. And so it's not normalized in our American culture like mourning would be in other places of the world. A Middle Eastern culture, they take for granted that there's going to be tears. And you're going to cry a bucket load of them. And you're going to take 30 days, first of all, just to change out of your mourning garb. And it's going to take another year before you really, say goodbye in a second funeral, as it were. And you still would take 3 to 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So we have to swim upstream to be able to express our mourning. And that's why having people around us who understand, who are empathetic, willing to support us, probably because they've been through the same thing themselves, that's so important to have that support system.
Yeah. And that kind of leads me into the next question is, I heard too, if I'm out perhaps with my friends, they don't want to hear me complain. They from their perspective, it perhaps sounds like complaining about the situation or their current lot in life. But you say, find some friends, some peers who are empathetic to this and things like that.
Empathy is the biggest characteristic you need. Not someone who knows what to say,
right,
but someone who knows how to sit with you and feel your feelings. And that usually means someone that's had this experience before.
When it comes to other people around you and ways that they can assist or steps that I can take to help move through the process, what are some of the suggestions? The first thing I can think of is, we're blessed here to have some beautiful nature, some beautiful trail systems, things like that.
Yes.
Getting out, some fresh air. Talk a little bit about those types of things.
Yeah, those are good self-care kinds of things, to be able to get into a larger frame of reference with nature. All of a sudden, my pain, which has me very self-absorbed, somehow can morph into this beautiful woods and trees and things around me, the gentle ebb and flow of the ocean or the beach or things like that. That's so good. And it's an out-of-body experience. It can be at sometimes. Other times it can just feel cold and alone.
For sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned kind of a timeline in other parts of the world. When it come back to how we deal with it here in North America, perhaps, some folks will say, man, it's been 6 months, 9 months. It's been a year. I'm still feeling these emotions. Talk to me more about how that's natural. That's part of the process.
Absolutely. A lot of times we don't really begin to do the work, serious work of mourning, until 18 months out.
Wow.
18 months to 3 years. I know that with my grandson and myself, we talked about how the first Christmas, we were still kind of numb. And we were just in the pain and the shock of it all. The second Christmas, we really felt the absence of our loved one. And we talked about it. You know, how is this so different? And we made a point of remembering and not keeping silent, not leaving the death of my son as a dead elephant on the floor that we tiptoe around.
Sure.
But it's important as families to talk about this loss and what it means to each other. It kind of gets into the needs of mourning. I would say the first need of mourning, and this is when the people tap dance around, is just to recognize this person is gone. I'm not going to physically have them present in my life anymore. That takes a while because while my head knows, yeah, that happened, we've had the funeral, my heart is still working in its connection. The phone rings. Oh, maybe that's Todd. Someone knocks on the door. Oh, I see a crowd and there's someone that looks like my son.
Right.
And so our heart is still processing that relationship. So that's the first thing, recognize that gently, but that's real. The second thing then is to move into the pain. You got to feel it to heal it. And so rather than being pain avoiding, which our culture tends to do, wants to hear, well, let's displace your pain. Let's go to work quickly. Let's replace the pain. You can find, something else. I remember when I lost my dog of 12 years, a yellow lab. Right away, everybody wanted to bring me a new dog.
Sure.
And I wasn't ready yet, because I still had grieving to do. So to befriend the pain of that loss is actually very important. And what happens then when I can express this mourning, when I can also memorialize my son or others that I've lost with photos and with stories and with remembrances, something begins to happen. There is what I would call a divine momentum that tends to soften the pain. And so over time, that motion, getting it in motion, begins to help. I like to use the analogy, some people think time heals all things. It really doesn't. Time can only freeze things in a certain place. But it's movement that helps. So, for example, you're driving down the road and you have a flat tire. You don't get out and sit on the side of the road and say, well, time heals all things. The tires will magically fill with air again and we'll keep going.
Right.
No, you get out into your trunk, you get out your spare tire and your jack. Or, like me, you call AAA. And the air doesn't magically flow back in. You have to do something to get it going. And that's what these activities of mourning are meant to do, is to put it in motion. And as that happens, we have a way of feeling it differently. So all of a sudden, I can be grateful for my son and the wonderful memories, not just grimace with pain.
Right.
Yeah, and so that then helps me move on to, I think, a fourth need of mourning is to understand who I am now, in light of the fact that I'm not the father to this one. And I relied on him a lot. We talked on the phone every day. And I really found him to be a main support system in my life. Now I have to do some of those things myself. I can't call him up when I need help with my computer anymore. I've got to read the manual.
Yeah.
So, and that then, what I've found over time, is that it helps us move on to reinventing our own sense of meaning and purpose in life. Why am I here? I mean, that's the only reason I am privileged to talk about grief with others, is because I have experienced healing and reintegration, reconciliation with that in my own life. So I find some meaning and purpose in sharing. At first, though, that sense was really gone in me. And it does for everybody. We have a disorientation of, what is this all about? What is life all about? Why am I here? In fact, I can't go to a funeral without thinking, taking away something that I want to do different about my life because of something that was said about the person that died. And so we begin to take these things into our own sense of mission, vocation, why we're here. And then after that, I would say we have a need to continually reach out to people. We continually need help. Because there's no statute of limitations on grief.
Right.
It doesn't ever go away, but it's like I said, it softens, you reintegrate it, and it comes mixed and mingled with our joys in life. And also in that point, we are capable, I think, of helping others.
One of the things that you were talking about there was our kind of self-avoidance of pain, and whether it be through, eating too much ice cream, or starting to turn to the bottle perhaps, or turning to antidepressants. Yeah. What would you say about using those as ways people try to get through the process?
Yeah. They have a name for those in the grief parlance. It's called STIRB, short-term energy relieving behaviors. Okay? So for the moment, they can numb the pain.
Right.
But it doesn't work for very long. And that's the problem. It's only postponing the pain. And sometimes they carry with them baggage. In other words, drinking problems, drug addiction, sexual misconduct problems. And Dave Ramsey calls shopping retail therapy.
Yes.
And what can happen then, you end up with some big credit card bills. So they always have a backside to them that comes back and kicks us in the butt.
So you're saying that those are just kind of prolonging the time that we're going to have to eventually going to have to face this in some way. Yeah. And by using these, it's just prolonging that effort and then also causing other problems.
It does, you're right. And there's no way around grief, over grief, underneath grief. The only way is through it. And as we walk, and there's a sense, befriending that, not afraid of the pain, that's courage. It is courage. I always thank our grief group for their courage in showing up, because it's much easier not to. But to do that, and that's the way that allows healing to take place.
I asked about friends talking about perhaps saying that they're complaining. Now let's talk about the friends that want to bring you out, perhaps want to bring you that new dog, and you're not ready for it. How do you explain to them that, and that it's okay that I'm still not quite ready to re-engage?
Yeah. I'd say thanks so much, Jeff. I know you really are thinking about me, and that helps. I really appreciate your friendship. But right now, that's probably not what I need most.
Right.
I still need some time. Otherwise, I won't be good to this dog, because I'll be mad at him for being there in Harley's place. And so you understand that, and you say, okay, So that's, I think, but it takes strength sometimes, because we want to be nice to people and things like that. But there's a boundary too sometimes. I can't go out and do everything, be happy-go-lucky life of the party. So able to draw some boundaries and say, I know what I can and I can't handle right now. And so excuse me for this, and when I feel different, I'll let you know. So.
And you mentioned some of the groups, the grief groups that you're with. Is that here at Faith Lutheran, or is that throughout the community? Talk a little bit about the resources that we have in Shelton and Mason County for folks to understand.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I do lead a grief support group here. We call it Reconciling Life's Losses. It's a 13-week session, and we cover a lot of these same kind of bases. There's some very fine counselors here in our area, both in private practice and through the hospital, Mason General. I'm also beginning to work with a children's group through Love Inc. downtown Shelton. And I know they're working with some of our school counselors as well to refer children that have a particular need for grieving, for mourning, because they're often left out. And yet these losses in their family really affect them quite deeply. And if they can learn how to express their loss and their feelings too. It's very helpful.
It's a good opportunity for the adults in the room to show the youth out there that it is okay to cry, to feel these emotions, to work through the process here. And that's,
You only grieve because you have first loved. That's what makes the emotion of grief something that we can befriend, because it's a sign of our love for the person we've lost. And they're two sides of the same coin, really. If we hadn't loved, we wouldn't grieve. But because we grieve, it's a sign how deeply we loved. So.
Well, I don't think we could have found a better person to talk about this with us here today. Again, Pastor Terry Oliver at the Faith Lutheran Church on North 13th here in Shelton. I really appreciate the time that you took to talk with us about this, and just thank you so much for being available.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for your work in
good to
recording
see
this.
you.
Okay.